Somebody.
This is the reason.
All right, I think it's time to start. Everybody hear me okay? Excellent, excellent. Well, I'd like to welcome everybody today. We've got a nice crowd in the house, and that's always a fun thing. We love town input, and the citizens, of course, are vital to the decision-making process of the town council. This is the Thursday, October 20th, 2022, regularly scheduled council meeting. And with that being said, Kim, if you'll please call the roll.
Mr. Owens? Mr. Anderson?
Here.
Ms. Pillion? Here. Ms. Quetch? Here. And Mayor Webb?
Here. At this time, I'd like to ask Vice Mayor Quetch to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Let's see. That brings us to the approval of the agenda. Council, there is an item, K1, that's a consideration of bids item. I would like to table that till the next meeting, if that's okay. I don't think we're quite there yet. And Cam, do we need to adopt that in the amendment of the agenda?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So if you guys are okay with that, guys and gals, then I would entertain an approval of the agenda with that change.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
All right, motion by Vice Mayor Quetch to approve the agenda with tabling item K1 and a second by Mr. Anderson. Any discussion, council? Hearing none, Kim, if you'll please call the roll.
Mr. Owens?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
Ms. Pillion? Aye. Ms. Quetch? Aye. And Mayor Webb?
Aye. That brings us to public comments, and if I'm looking at this right, Kim, I don't see any public comments today.
Correct.
Thank you. All right, brings us to public hearings, and we do have a public hearing today. This is a public hearing pursuant to Virginia Code, Section 15.2-1800 and Article 567. I had to count it there real quick. Section 9 of the Constitution to consider a permanent easement measuring 4 feet 3 inches by 9 feet 3 inches located at East Stairwell, the Main Street location of the building, known commonly as the Summers Building, located at 102 Court Street, parcel number 013-1-64. The easement is necessary for the construction of small staircase and landing, which is required to meet current building code as it relates to emergency egress. Do we have somebody coming up to speak, Cam? Is that right?
However you want to do it, yeah.
Oh, it's the Mayanna Rice Show. Welcome.
That's how it tends to be, huh? Mayanna Rice, Community Development Director. I'll just give you a little bit of a background, and then we'll have the applicants and a variety of people speak about this. The Summers Building, as was indicated, is located at 102 Court Street. It's been in the design build process for a few years now, so we all have seen it. Part of this project is that there is a fourth floor. That fourth floor and the capacity of usage necessitated a stairwell be built for emergency exit. So if you all remember, before, there's been a variety of businesses in there. I think the Shady Business was the last one that was in there. There's a entrance that comes basically out onto Main Street. It had a couple of little stairs coming down. When this stairwell was built for emergency exit purposes, the doorway had to be shifted from being pulled inward to being pushed out. And so obviously, if there was a fire or an emergency, you wouldn't want people sort of jammed up behind a door that was being pulled inward. When you then push the door outwards, now you actually need a landing pad for people to walk out on. They can't just push the door forward and fall directly into the street. So there is an elevation difference between the bottom of the stairwell and Main Street. Because of that, they are requesting that they be allowed to have a easement into the sidewalk in order to produce this small stairway, landing and steps. The original request that you saw in your packet was for the steps to come down on one side, and so the request would have been for about 4 feet 3 inches by 9 feet 3 inches. The applicant did speak with the chair of the HPRB, our Historic Preservation Board, and there is some concern regarding that design. There is a possible request to have two sets of stairs coming off of that. We're in a little bit of a chicken and an egg situation because the applicant has no rights to go to the HPRB to ask for something until the town council has granted an easement for them to utilize that space. And so they need to come to you all first, ask for the easement, go through the public hearing process, and then take their design to HPRB. If you all take in the information provided by staff and the applicant and any other comments from the public and choose to approve a larger area, that is something that you could do today for them to utilize. The second thing that I just wanted to mention briefly is that there is a cherry tree that's right there in the stairwell area. Right now, there's not obviously enough distance for ADA compliance between that tree and the proposed landing and stairway. So we are working with the Tree Preservation Board, and our arborist comes in on Friday, so I don't know the results yet, but the idea is to take out that one cherry tree at the applicant's expense, put in two smaller street trees further along the block so that there will be 5 feet of space along there.
Okay.
So those are kind of the issues you have, and the applicant is here to speak to his case.
Can I
Yeah,
ask you a legal question?
absolutely.
We call that reverse delegation at my firm. Is the issue with ingress and egress only because of the 4th floor access? I mean, if this was on the 2nd floor, would it require the same thing?
Yes, from what I understand is that because that became an emergency, a required and a needed emergency access point for egress, that created this need for the exit onto a platform.
But if a building, for instance, had a fire escape, then that would serve
Correct.
as the egress instead of, but it just happens to be that it's this stairwell is internal, that it's, okay.
That is correct.
Gotcha.
So if there was an alternate decision that had been made in the design at a different time, or if that 4th floor had come out in a different location, or any other potential ideas that we don't have in front of us today, then maybe they wouldn't be asking for this easement. But because of that location and where where they are proposing to have egress, they will need this.
Can we ask you questions now, or are we supposed to?
No, you can ask, yeah.
Are there other locations in town, an example of this, where this has happened in the past that you are aware of?
I do not have another example where this has happened.
So this would be a first time for the Abbey to do this?
There are other, if you look at the, if you look in your packet at the original survey, you can see that there were 3 steps that were identified in Main Street. If you also look on your Court Street side, you can see that there is a series of 2 steps and a landing on the Court Street side that appear on this document. Have they come in and made this type of a request for egress? I do not believe so. Both of those situations are were historically there at a previous time. So they do exist, just not in this capacity.
So you probably don't have to be able to answer this question. In other historic districts, has this come up before, and how did they address it?
I do not have other examples. But basically at any point, if there is an interaction between a private piece of property and a public right-of-way, or could be, stairs into a park, or it could be in any situation, if there is a request to utilize public street, sidewalk, any type of property, they would be going through this type of request.
Now, the basic 4x9, that just covers steps one direction, not both directions.
You are correct.
I guess that's a question we need to ask.
So I
Correct.
think, and I don't want to tarry too long and ask too many stupid questions, because I can come up with some good ones. But I guess my question is I heard what you were saying. There was some hesitation because they felt like, is it symmetry that they're worried about with wanting steps on both sides, or?
You are correct. The discussion that I've had, and the chair of the HPRB is here today, so you might want to ask him. That has not gone to the HPRB yet.
Right,
So
right.
just to be clear on that. But the concept is, the discussion that I had indicated that it is Main Street, and the appearance of this, the way that it is currently designed, made it feel like it was a back entrance. It is. It will
Okay.
not be a primary entrance, but it
Okay.
is facing Main Street versus one of the other
Okay.
subsequent streets.
Sure. Council, what are the questions that we have for Diana?
And this came up when we were talking about licenses or permits or that sort of thing on the sidewalk, and it depends on the property. Some property owners own the sidewalk in some locations, so they could have an opening out in that way, and the town not be involved because the town doesn't own the property. In this particular one, the landowner had a survey done and the town does own the sidewalk, so the only way they can have a right over the property is to have a public hearing and y'all discuss it and vote. There is procedurally, and maybe all the people who are here, we can come up with a solution of, I think there's gonna be necessarily a back and forth and maybe a back and forth to get all this done, depending on what we come out with. But I think the first step is whether you decide to grant the property right or not, and then if they have the property right, they can go to HPRB and do it. But
Okay.
maybe we can have some open internal discussions about what everybody has in mind, and maybe we can reach a solution.
And I have a question, and this may be answered organically throughout this process, but is there an alternative? I mean, what is the alternative? It sounds to me like there may not be an alternative. And so I'm assuming that according to code, there has to be an egress. So if there's not an alternative, what happens? So that is my question. And as we talk about potential solutions, that may be answered, but is that a correct assumption that I'm making?
In this situation, the way that the building is tucked next to other buildings, because this is a downtown structure, it's not in a suburban environment in which you might have other ways to get in and out of the building. It is directly adjacent to another structure, the William King House. So there isn't another way for them to essentially go out the other direction. And so now, so this is the only location at this time.
Okay.
So, procedurally, Cam, would I be best to open the public comments, or public hearing, have the speakers come up, and then we can kind of try to coalesce everybody together?
Yeah,
Is
I
that?
think open the public hearing
Okay.
and let the commenter comment, then close the public hearing, and then I think we
Okay.
can bring everybody up in the
Okay,
discussion.
all right, maybe we can find a solution then, all right. So this is a public hearing, as I said before, so I would like to open the public hearing and welcome Mr. Jeff Johnson up to have his, I think it's 5 minutes of fame. Is that right? Welcome.
Today.
Thank you. My name is Jeff Johnson. I live at 102 East Main Street here in Abingdon. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. My only concern, and I think a couple of you have kind of alluded to this, is the timing of this. It's the timing and the precedence that the town may be setting. I'm not privy to everything that has gone on up to this point. Nathan can probably address that in more detail. However, this building has been under construction for 2 years. You've known where all of the improvements are going to be. And, all of a sudden, the town is placed in the precarious position of saying, just like Ms. Pillion stated, there really isn't a choice. I mean, without this, then it's my understanding the COA relative to the fourth floor cannot be granted, as such. I just worry about the precedents that you're setting. One possible solution would be to tie the easement itself into the utilization or the use of the fourth floor, and actually make the easement have a reversionary interest in it, so that if that use were ever to change, anything of this nature, then the easement would revert back to the town. I know the HPRB has some design specifications, things of this nature, but just trying to limit the precedents that you're setting going forward. You could have restaurants now all of a sudden come to you and say, I need this space for my patrons. You've said you've done it up here. there just needs to be, I think there needs to be in this situation, and again, Nathan can address it in more detail because I'm not privy to all the details. There should have been a lot of thought placed and kind of all the I's dotted and T's crossed, relative to issues of this nature. Certainly want to support businesses in the area, but this is Main Street. That is one of the most iconic buildings within Abingdon, adjacent to the courthouse. So it needs to be done in a very appropriate fashion. However, my only concern is just the precedence that's being set and whether or not some compromise could be reached to where the town would be protected going forward if that use ever changed. There was an alternative that was arrived at, something of that nature, then the town in its sole discretion would have the ability to extinguish that easement and revert it back.
So, a stupid question. If the fourth floor is not the rooftop, the fourth floor is the upper floor of the building, or is the fourth floor the rooftop?
I think the fourth floor is the rooftop.
Okay, okay. So there's already an operating business in place?
Operating under a temporary COO.
Okay.
Okay.
I just want to know all the facts. Yes, okay.
I appreciate your all's time.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate you.
Thank
Again, this is a public hearing. If anybody else would like to come up and speak, they're welcome to do so at this time. Byram, I'll probably pull you up in a second if you want. And he's part of the presentation, right? Okay, yeah. So if there's no one else, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing. And Nathan, Byram, Mayanna, whoever needs to come up to try to figure out a solution, we'll certainly entertain it.
Proclamation first,
Oh, we're waiting till later. Okay, yeah, hang tight. Just sit down. Sit down, young son. I'm joking. We don't want to hold the veterans up forever. So I'll wait just a little bit longer. The public hearing is closed. That brings us to our proclamation, which I'm very excited about today. We have a proclamation recognizing November 2022 as Veterans and Military Families Month. Oftentimes, if you watch me in council meetings, I pawn the reading of these things off to other council members, but I'm going to actually keep this one today. Y'all are going to get tired of hearing me speak. And before I do read the proclamation, I just want to say how impressed, I think I can speak for the council when I say this, how impressed I have been with our Veteran Advisory Board. We were looking for a solution for the veterans' needs in the community. And we felt like there could be a stronger presence, and absolutely, I think we've arrived at the conclusion that there is. And you all are doing such a fantastic job with your outreach, with your activities, and I applaud Councilmember Pillion for stepping up on that board. She's a great asset, and I feel like, in my opinion, that we've got the best veteran support presence that we've ever had, at least in my tenure on council. So I applaud you all for that. You're absolutely doing a great job. And with that being said, I'd like to read this proclamation recognizing November 2022 as Veteran and Military Families Month. Whereas the United States is a beacon of hope, freedom, and opportunity to people around the world, and whereas November was first declared as Military Family Month in 1996 to acknowledge the tremendous sacrifices our military families make, whereas our service members do not serve alone. Alongside them are the dedicated members who embody strength, resilience, and courage. And whereas care of military families and children sustains our fighting force and strengthens the health, security, and safety of our families and communities, and whereas our brave service men and women, their families, and their loved ones have made great sacrifices to protect the freedoms we enjoy, and whereas these service members and veterans are true leaders in our communities and are integral to the success, advancement, and prosperity of our town and community, and whereas we recognize our military families' integral role in supporting our service members and contributing to their mission, while our men and women are serving at home and overseas, we must provide their families with the resources they need to thrive in our community. And whereas this month we recognize our local local service members and veterans and remember with deep gratitude those who have given their lives in defense of our freedom, and therefore the town's Veteran Advisory Board requested community members wear a red poppy beginning November 1st, 2022 through Veterans Day, November 11th, for remembrance and sacrifices made. And now therefore I, Derek Webb, Mayor, proclaim November 2022 as Veteran and Military Families Month in the town of Abingdon and commend its observance to all citizens. Give them a round of applause. And as I alluded to earlier, social media can sometimes be a real burden, but you all have done a fantastic job on social media with your presence. I'm seeing these red poppies being created all over, at schools, at local businesses. I mean, it's just been a great outreach program. So I'd like to invite you all up. I've got this proclamation, and we'd love to get some pictures. And if you're willing to take pictures with us.
Yeah, the shirts came out nice. It took forever to pick it up nice.
Don't the polos look great? Kim ordered the polos. Don't they look awesome? They're so nice.
Yes, they are.
They had them on the other day in the Veterans Day.
Were you? Yes.
Hello. It's good to see you. Thank y'all for coming. I was pointing out how awesome your polos are.
All right, now who wants to hold the
Yeah,
flag?
yes, I'm here. Where's Becky?
Oh, excellent, thanks.
Yes. And if you all have anything you'd like to say, by all means, please.
Well, I would just like to say, Mr. Mayor and to members of the council, and on behalf of our chair, Denton Kaiser, we really thank you for having us here today, and we're glad to serve.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all so much.
Examples of all the different poppies that people have created.
Yeah, so
Even some got sent from Texas.
knitted
polos are
poppies.
That's it. That's
Knitted
I love
poppies,
it.
actual poppies. Yeah, there's all.
That is beautiful. It's beautiful. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
I just want to say that working with this group, this is the most energetic group with the best ideas all the time. Our meetings are fantastic because everybody has multiple ideas about ways to promote the veterans and their needs, and it's
Sure.
amazing.
Sure. Absolutely. Thank you all so much.
Lots of good things to come.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for the poppies.
I need one.
Yeah, absolutely. We can start wearing those November 1st, correct? Okay, excellent.
Is that the kind you want?
There's those other ones too. Oh, look, there's crochet ones. Wow.
All right, so just moving right along, we don't have any resolutions, first reading of ordinances, or second reading of ordinances. We tabled K1, and that brings us back to Mr. Berg for new business. And again, I'll read this. It's pursuant to Virginia Code Section 15-2-1800 and Article 7, Section 9 of the Constitution to consider a permanent easement measuring 4 feet 3 inches by 9 feet 3 inches located at the East Stairwell Main Street location of the building known commonly as the Summers Building located at 102 Court Street, parcel number 013-1-64. The easement is necessary for the construction of a small staircase and landing, which is required to meet current building code as it relates to emergency egress. Mr. Berg, well,
Yes. Thank you, Mayor Webb. Thank you, council members. For the record, my name's Nathan Berg. I live at 24383 Walden Road in Abingdon. And I'm one of the owners of Wahlberg Construction, representing the owners of the Summers Building. So, I guess what questions do you have regarding the easement?
Council, I know we've got questions.
How did we get here is probably the
Yeah.
best.
Okay.
Just kind of start from.
Sure, we'll
Not-
start
not
from the beginning. From the beginning.
The recent beginning.
Yeah. As you know, this project has been not straightforward, to put it mildly. From a engineering and building code perspective, it's been the most complex project that I've been involved in 18 plus years of being in the construction industry. I think Rick Statzer would echo that by far. From a building code standpoint, it's probably been one of the most complicated projects that we've done, because essentially we built a fourth floor onto an existing 3-story building, and that fourth floor, along with that, carries with it complications in regards to the building type, whether that's non-combustible, combustible, then structurally supporting that, and then also it's fairly complicated in terms of what the use type is, and then achieving the proper egress for the number of occupants. You have to have 2 emergency egress points of egress where people from the 4th floor can make their way all the way down to the street. There was one existing stairwell that we've utilized. It's an open stairwell, so that's not non-fire rated. This we had to have an additional stairwell that is fire rated, and because of various limitations in terms of just the structure, and also the fact that we have neighbors on every other side other than Court Street and Main Street, there was basically no other option than to create that stairwell where the existing back door was. So that back door is existing, and so again, for many reasons, it became evident that was basically the only place where we could put in a fire-rated emergency egress. So that's how we ended up there. Now, as it relates to building code as applied to historic renovations and renovations of existing buildings, there is somewhat of a gray zone on certain issues. From what I understand, in going back and forth and interpreting the code, ultimately Rick Statzer, who, he's the final say when it comes to building code issues. He basically felt that his interpretation of the building code basically mandated that we make the door out swinging, and because of that, needing a landing for people to walk out onto. So, again, how we ended up and why we're discussing this at this point is because it was not a clean cut and dry question. There was lots of back and forth over whether we needed the landing or not, or whether, because of the renovation code, whether we'd be allowed to have it in swing, or whether it would be better to have it out swing without a landing. Again, ultimately, this is where we ended up after going back and forth a lot. So in an ideal world, in an ideal situation, we would have, from the beginning, known, had every unknown variable figured out and had everything, clearly designed from the start. That would have made, as a contractor, that would have made our job a lot easier. But the fact of the matter was, it was an extremely complicated project on every front, and this is the result of a long discussion and a lot of research between us and Rick. So that's kind of, it's where we are now. Obviously, I understand the concerns of precedent, but it's worthwhile mentioning that there is currently a set of stairs already built that is encroaching on the right-of-way. Essentially, we are asking for a larger area than what is currently being encroached on.
Well, council, where do we start? Who has questions? Come on, Mike.
Were there other options as far as, I'm just going through my mind, and I don't know if this was either brought up or not. The front of the building, and you have the doorway and the 2 steps that come down. Obviously, what you're proposing is to come further out 4 feet approximately. Is there not a way to go 4 feet in and box that in like an airlock and then have the steps come down to the street level, to the
So
sidewalk level.
because of the dimensions of the stairwell, that would eat up basically all of the walking space that you have to get to the door in the first place. And so, without cutting a new opening into the side of the building, which poses a lot of, that would be inadvisable, if nothing else, just from a perspective of preserving the architecture of the building. We again, we're trying to preserve the original architecture as much as possible, so that's why we utilize that door. And there simply is not enough room to go have that door inset, right?
Being on the Historic Preservation Review Board, we're very cautious about setting precedents for something that might come back and bite us in the future. Like Jeff was alluding to and you've alluded to, and I'd like to hear Byron's comment on that. I don't know that there's anything in our guidelines that addresses that. Do you know, Byron? We're always cautious about setting a precedence that's going to come back to bite us in the future on the Historic Preservation Review Board. And so if we make this decision and then it goes to you all to make another decision, is there anything in our guidelines now that I don't know of that addresses this situation?
Well, no, I mean, I think what we're always concerned about from the Historic Preservation Review Board is varying from our guidelines, making a variance, making an exception, and therefore setting a bad precedent that we don't want to have, allowing someone to have vinyl siding or allowing someone to have the wrong top of gutter and stuff like that. So this is just asking the town for an easement to comply with building code requirements. So I don't really see that the town is granting a variance here of something unusual. It's just granting an easement. You're not.
So you don't see in future, if we do this, that it would come back in the historical,
Let me ask you this, kind of one way to think about it is that we're not requesting you to make an exception in any rule. There's no variance. We're not requesting any variance in any rule. What we are requesting is the granting of the easement, which if somebody else were to approach you for another easement, that would have to be assessed based on those facts for that particular request. And ultimately, that is in your control. It has to be done on a case-by-case basis. There's nothing about me coming to you and asking for this easement that would somehow open the barn doors for everybody else to suddenly be granted this. You're within, and grant me if I'm wrong, Kim, it's ultimately your decision, and there's not I don't see there being necessarily a trigger that would somehow then, this being a trigger for allowing future easements.
Yeah, I mean, it isn't, I mean, there is gonna be a structure on it, but it is still an easement. I mean, it's not, we're not selling the property to them, it's still gonna be the town's property with this overlying right of an easement on it. So we're not giving the property away, and we still control it, in theory, so I agree with you there. And it seems like it's a pretty unique, it's never come up as far as anybody else that's in 100 years, I guess. Some may have been from ignoring what other people maybe should have rights to do, but just the way the building used to be kind of chopped up, and it had different uses, and all those uses were in the 50s and 60s and maybe before. None of the more modern rules sort of came into effect, and so it's sort of bringing all that building back together of the roof and this, the last use of where that stairwell was a completely separate business in that building on the first floor and not incorporating the fourth floor. So it's a lot of different things. But Byron, I mean, I think from HPRB's point of view, you had a concern about just what that structure would look like. So do you want to?
Sure, I can address that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I basically, I think from hearing all these different things, and Jeff, I truly appreciate you coming and speaking, because I completely understand the principle of setting a precedent, but I think my two questions are this. One, is there any safety issue with this structure now coming out? Is it gonna eat up too much sidewalk? Is that gonna be a problem? We
So-
don't think so, or?
We have to maintain at least 5 feet
Okay.
of
Yeah,
sidewalk
good.
clearance,
Right.
which is maintained.
Okay,
You
all
have
right,
it
that's,
over
that
5
was my
feet.
first question,
Yeah.
yeah. So then the
And
second
that's in
one.
part why the tree has to come down.
I was
The
about to
tree-
say, that
okay.
takes us to
Okay,
the tree
okay,
issue, because
all
the
right.
tree is right now in the way of that 5-foot clear
Okay,
way.
perfect,
But that's
perfect, yeah.
a fairly easy problem to solve.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So that was my first question. And my second one really was for Byram I've seen the proposed look, and I know that the HPRB is sometimes more concerned about this thing looking periods appropriate. So tell us, what is it that you think should happen?
So, I'm Byron McGeisler, current chair of the Historic Preservation Review Board, 228 East Main Street, it's my residence. So when the temporary structure went up, I don't know if you've seen it, but currently it's just roughed in with lumber for temporary access, since they do have a temporary occupancy permit. It's just landing straight out with just steps down to one side. And, you know, from the Historic Preservation Review Board, we're always, our guidelines are all designed toward keeping the historic district as closely to historically correct and accurate as we can be. You know, we're constantly requiring people have signs that are a certain size. We don't allow them to replace windows. We don't allow certain types of guttering. Just all sorts of appearance type guidelines. And so that, I ran into Nathan and was asking him about, what the design for the staircase was going to be, and I understood that it's going to be the same as what was mocked up. And the problem with that is that, that's very much that sort of asymmetrical staircase with a landing and steps down one side. That's what you might see at the back of a building, emptying out into an alley somewhere or something, not finished, not thought through, like you would expect to see, especially on the Main Street facade of a building, in the historic district right there, beside the courthouse, right on Courthouse Hill, that you really need a much better thought out stair, with the symmetrical steps. If it's not going to come straight out with the steps straight down, which is what we usually see in the historic district, if you have to have that landing, then it needs to be symmetrical, with the handrail symmetrical, and something that would really look appropriate for Main Street. And so that's when this sort of chicken and egg thing developed, because with them asking for the easement, the current easement they were asking for is not large enough to accommodate that. So that's how, once we got involved, there was a need for a larger easement.
Okay.
And so
you're talking about something that has a handrail coming down both sides and
Right.
kind of a pad at the top, and that way it's symmetric and.
right, so just
okay.
instead of the steps on one side, they would be on both sides.
Okay.
We'd just be adding, I guess, is it 3 steps?
3 or 4, because it slopes down.
Right.
So there would be
Right.
one additional
Right.
step on that side. But it essentially, a area of approximately 4 foot by 4 foot
Okay. Okay.
would be the additional onto the original requested 9 point.
Right.
The 9 foot.
Okay, so I think, council, the real question is that, Nate, do you think that's okay with the property owner? Is that something you
Yes.
guys will do?
Absolutely. Initially, we were just trying to keep the easement as small as possible.
Right.
Obviously, that 4 foot by 4 foot little square doesn't really, whether that's part of the easement or not, doesn't, that's kind of lost space anyway. So there wouldn't be really, adding the stairs, in my opinion, would, architecturally speaking, be much more attractive. But also, that additional stair would not in any way impede upon the 5 foot of clear space for the sidewalk. So there's really no real benefit to excluding that 4 foot by 4 foot section from the easement. And again, just in conversations that I've had with Byram and kind of looking at what a symmetrical staircase would look like, I think it would be something that would benefit the building, and the owners are in agreement.
So council, what other questions do we have for any of the involved parties.
Is it something that, I mean, I'm assuming that this
Yeah.
is something that's gonna be used in an emergency.
Correct.
It's not something that people are gonna be using.
No,
often.
the people that will be using it most would probably be, people, shopkeepers or the kitchen, taking stuff in, because that stairwell gives access to multiple points in the building. But no, it's not something that the public would really ever be using. And honestly, that door will probably remain locked from entry. It will be maintained open as an exit, but locked most of the time for people entering.
Not intended as the main entrance.
Right.
No, it is, right, it is, what I would say is it is a side entrance, but it's a prominent side entrance because of its location on Main Street.
With this larger easement, we're just giving it a better appearance.
Correct, with the
Right.
additional 4 foot by 4
Okay.
foot, we're making it look architecturally,
Okay.
I would say more appropriate to the original style of the building.
So, council, what about Jeff's comments about the somehow making it, and Jeff, I forget the verbiage you used, you attorneys speak over my head.
Well, I think the way that we could draft it would be that it was, specific to this use, and if that use stopped, then it would revert automatically to the town.
Okay.
I don't think I guess we could talk lots of legal esotericism if you wanted to, but I don't think it's appropriate for it to be temporary, because I don't think it's intended to be temporary. I think it's
Right.
intended to be in use for a long time.
Right.
So I do think that it would be granted as an easement, but I do think that we could have reversionary language in there. If that
Okay.
use stopped, then the property could revert back to the town.
Okay. All right. Is that something you guys can stomach?
Certainly, I think that would be something that Rick would definitely have to look at because of, essentially, it's about occupancy.
Sure.
So whatever, even if that becomes something else other than a restaurant.
Right.
If there's a certain amount of people allowed up there,
Right.
you have to have the exit. And so that would be fine. I mean, again, doesn't really make a material
Right.
difference to us.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
more of that's lawyer stuff, so.
That's it, that's it.
I'm okay with granting.
Is that, council, is that kind of the consensus I'm hearing, or is that something you can stomach? or-
I'm still having troubles with the, setting the precedents.
I understand.
I'm trying to go through my mind of the inventory of the properties in the historic district or where this might come up again. And, without driving up and down, I don't know. It may never come up again, but most likely.
It could.
It would have to be, and what's the occupancy level that it's 50 or something on the roof?
Yeah.
It would have to be a building that was used for this type of purpose, that was multi-level, that opened out onto the sidewalk.
Probably only 2 structures,
Right.
3
Right.
structures that
Right.
could potentially come back.
It almost,
It's almost-
I can't see a circumstance
And
that's.
ones where the town owns the sidewalk, which we
Yeah.
don't know the answer
Right.
to that
Right.
either everywhere.
It's unique because most of the time you could figure out a way to
Mhm.
have that exit land out on
Sure.
your own property.
I mean, if you had a house or, a professional office or that sort of thing, we wouldn't be talking about this because we wouldn't have all the criteria that we just talked about. So I see Jeff's point, and I do think that we could put reversionary language in there. And I think there is a difference between us granting the property as opposed to just an easement on the property of giving it away. So I don't see that as something that's gonna happen up and down the historic district.
So there'll be another hearing, public comments on this, correct? Or is this?
Or is this it? Is this the final?
This is it.
Okay. So we just have.
But,
public
so
hearing.
if you grant the easement, and then they can apply for the certificate of appropriateness to HPRB, and HPRB can review what they have planned, and then it can be approved.
Yeah. So basically, our motion would have to, number one, include what we were talking about with reversionary language. Number two, it would have to have some sort of a unknown size that's
No, I think we have
contingent.
That was sort of the chicken and the egg thing that we were, one of the many things that we were talking about is, I think since we're talking about a property right, we need to describe what it is that we're giving. I
Okay.
don't think that you guys can sort of defer that to HPRB.
Okay.
So I think the safest thing to do, it sounds like there's a consensus that that's okay, is to include the the dimensions that
Okay.
are proposed by what Byron has suggested that HPRB might consider.
Okay.
I guess in theory, HPRB could say, we don't care. I doubt it, but maybe.
So do we have a-
And
do we
it
have
could
an
be the
actual
smaller
number
one,
then?
and then the property owner could come back and we could reduce
That's
the
why I was
easement
asking if
at
we're
that
gonna have another
point.
hearing
Yeah,
on this.
yeah.
To get, if we give, like.
I don't think that they can go to HPRB until we
Till
vote
we
today.
have, yeah. So do we, I guess what I'm saying is, do we have to have, these numbers that we have here don't include the symmetrical steps? So
Right.
we'll have to add 4x4 to whatever is in the packet, is right? Is that right?
Right, so our formal request would be an easement of 13 feet, 4 inches by 4 feet, 3 inches.
Okay, so 13 4x4 is what we're talking. And
Check my math.
that's inclusive, and that's inclusive of what Byram is
That would include-
suggesting. Okay,
And
all
that
right.
doesn't go beyond the end of the building by no means. That does, the addition of the steps on the east side doesn't go beyond the end of the building. I know.
It would stop at, correct, yes, it would stop at the corner of
Right.
the building.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, council, I think I sort of feel like we, I say this all the time, but councils for generations have been considered not business friendly, and we have tried to break that mold, and I sort of feel like that plays in. I'm committed to trying to be as business friendly as we can. But, ultimately it lies within the council. So I guess I would entertain a motion, if that's your all's pleasure, with the conditions we've discussed, the reversionary language, the.
Ms. Rice, was that the right measurements?
Yeah.
I agree. I've been
Yeah,
up there, it's fantastic.
The conversation, the
It's a
side
nice
conversation
addition
was
to
being
town.
had with the fire department was just the fact that if the door doesn't swing 180 degrees, no one will ever be able to go down the other stairs. They won't. So the door is recessed enough that when it opens, you will only ever go down the one side of the stairs. So it will just be decorative, the other
Right, the other
stairs.
side, unless you let the door close and then walk down the other side.
Exactly,
Yeah, okay,
exactly.
gotcha. Makes
So
sense, yeah.
that was the thing. So that should be the correct size then.
Right, okay, excellent.
Yes, I agree. I was going to say that it's a nice addition to town. It seems to have been popular and busy so far.
Sure.
And I don't see, if there's not another option, there's not another option. And I think the best thing we can do is make it as aesthetically pleasing as possible, use the revisionary language.
Sure.
Understand that, we're trying not to set a precedent because sometimes things happen. I don't know what else, I don't know if there's another solution, but if this solution is amenable to the HPRB,
Right, and palatable to all involved parties, I mean, I think I'm okay with it, council.
Okay with it as well.
So, okay. Mike, can you stomach it? I know you're having some heartburn, I can hear
I
it.
mean, I'm not opposed to it. I understand that it has to be done. I get that. And I'm all for it. And I'm all for business also. I'm just struggling with, 10 years from now, when somebody gonna say, well, I need an easement to do such and such on the sidewalk. Might be different than this, but have we set a precedence there that we're gonna have to defend ourselves, or whoever's the council at that point, or
Right,
the town at that
sure,
point?
sure.
I think
That's
it'd be
what I'm
pretty
struggling.
difficult for somebody to argue that they're the same as this. I mean, there's just not
Well,
another
maybe
one.
I know it's gonna be case by case, but they're still gonna come back and use this as an example of, we allowed this, and
Sure.
our situation is not that much different,
Yeah,
so
sure.
why can't you allow me?
I think that the benefit of Mr. Stetzer and Ms. Rice certainly getting involved in this is, I think in the past, people just did it, and nobody said anything.
Nobody asked any, yeah. That's
Nobody
it.
asked,
That's it.
and it didn't come,
That's it.
we'd have open
Right.
public discussion about it and put
Sure.
everybody's heads together and lots of great input from the community.
Sure.
So
Sure.
I think that, if somebody wanted to do that in the future, and certainly they could point to this as an example, but they'd have to go through the same hoops that they've had to go through and have it vetted ahead of time. And hopefully, and I'm sure the council would say this, don't get to this point
Yeah, sure, sure.
I think we just
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
to cross that bridge if we
Yeah.
get to it. So
Okay.
we're here.
Well, I don't want
And
to,
you can vote on HPRV. and just-
that's it.
You get another shot.
That's it. All right. Well, council, I think we probably have asked as many questions as we can think of, or at least it sounds like really good conversation. So, at this time, I would, what's your pleasure?
I'll make that motion.
Okay.
We do.
I'll second the motion.
So, Cam, do you have enough with that motion? We want the reversionary language, we want the size
All
to
those
be
details in there.
13.4 by 4.3, and contingent upon, of course, HPRB approving it. What else am I missing?
Just you got the reversionary language of the use of stuff.
Okay. All right, so that's a motion by Vice Mayor Quetch and a second by Mr. Anderson. Council, do we have any more discussion that we want to have, or, come on, Mike, it's your chance, man.
I'll vote.
Okay, all right. Hearing none, Kim, if you'll please call the roll.
Mr. Owens?
Nay.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
Ms. Pillion?
Aye.
Ms. Quetch?
Aye.
And Mayor Webb.
Aye. Thank you all for the discussion. I think that's healthy. Anytime you have something like this come up, to have all pieces and parts meet together and just sort of hash things out. And it sounds like we came up with the best solution that we can, so.
You know I'm not against you.
Hey, Mike, I
That's
don't.
it.
Just good luck getting a reservation.
And as Amanda, and just to close it out, though, as Amanda said, I think you guys have done a beautiful job with the building. I can't think of anybody that would have done as good a job with
It's
the
lovely.
design and the implementation of what you've achieved. So it is a beautiful, beautiful structure.
Yeah.
And we can all agree on that, right?
Yes, we can. And I've been there a couple of times. Everybody needs to go. It's
That's
awesome.
it, that's it.
I promise I would just.
Oh, I know.
All right. So we do have some old business. We've got a presentation of the final draft of the zoning and subdivision ordinance, Mayena. Do you want to introduce our guest?
Yes. So, as you all remember, at our last workshop, we had the Berkeley group attend and give us their update, and I think we went through the first 6 chapters, first 5, and so she's going to go through the rest. We do know you all have another appointment, so it'll go as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
And then staff is going to have you go through a little section on the sign ordinance, because even though it was drafted not too long ago, there's still some things that have been a bit of a struggle for us to enforce. So
Sure.
this is Rebecca, and she's right here, and she'll take it from here.
Welcome back.
Yes, thank you for having me back, and looking forward to working through, as Mayana said, this last half of the zoning and subdivision ordinance. So today we're going to talk through Articles 6 through 11. There's also time that, now you've had time to read that huge document. If there's other things that you want to bring up as well, even things from our last meeting, those first articles, you're welcome to do that. This is where we really want to fine tune and get ready to take this back to the public for public hearing with the Planning Commission. So just to remind everyone here and folks maybe listening online who don't know about this process and what we've been doing, we started this back in March 2021 with community survey, stakeholder interviews, a public workshop, just trying to hear from the public, talking with staff, and see the direction that the zoning ordinance need to be, identifying challenges, identifying places of opportunity, and then utilizing that as we went through drafting with the Planning Commission. We presented articles. They would provide their suggestions for edits. We would incorporate those and then go back to the Planning Commission. Staff has also worked closely with Planning Commission, revising the draft as well. Then we had public open house, another opportunity to kind of say, okay, here's the complete draft. Public, what do you think? Where have we missed the mark? Where are things great? And now we're before you. We had the first work session looking at the first half, and now we're here talking about the last half. And then we're going to move into, again, public feedback, having public hearing, and then potentially adoption. So the ordinance structure, we went through the first 5 articles last time. This time we're kind of concentrated on the second half of the ordinance, if you will. The first half was administration, and then those zoning articles, those districts, talking about the lot size and setbacks and all of those types of things. And this time we're going to be talking about uses and community design standards, nonconformities, and subdivision, and then the definitions. So just a little bit before I dive into those other things, I do want to revisit one item, and this is the zoning districts. When we talked last, there was, Planning Commission was proposing an R5 and an R6 district, and they have since then talked a little bit more about this, and they are removing the R6 district. They're only proposing the R5. They feel like that's enough for your town to be able to encourage some additional density if need be, and then you can always revisit this in the future if there needs to be additional density options. So then, looking at Article 6, the use permissions. This article has 2 matrices. The first one is the primary district. So that's your ag, your residential, business, PUD. And then there's a second matrix for the O&H sub-district. So because the Old and Historic District has sub-districts, those are captured in a second table in this article. The way the table works is left-hand column is all the uses that are allowed within the town in alphabetical order, and you can follow that across to the right to see if it's a by right use, a special use permit is required. If it's a blank, that means it's not allowed in that particular district. And then when you get to the far right side, the use performance standard, there's a reference. It's taking you to another section of the ordinance so that you know, okay, this use has additional standards that have to be followed. What we've done in this section is we've consolidated uses. So what that means is currently your ordinance has bowling alley, video game rooms, skating rinks, pool rooms, so all very similar uses in terms of when they get used, what's the impact to the surrounding area. So things like that we have consolidated into a term that could capture those things as well as maybe future things. If there's a new sport that someone creates and someone wants to, have that indoors here, it would fall under the use commercial indoor recreation and amusement, which is what these also fall under. Another example is we have introduced the term just light manufacturing, so that you don't have to name every type of material that's being manufactured. And so anything that comes in, it can fall under that light manufacturing. The definitions help clarify that these are broad terms and what all is captured by those. And then we've also added modern uses, so things like mobile vending, which would be food trucks, as well as, a bookstore, mobile bookstore, things like that. And then short-term rental is another modern use. I know that you all address that now, but kind of in a different way. And then we've also added things based from the Code of Virginia uses. So there's uses that Code of Virginia says, locality, you have to have these, you have to define it this way, it has to be allowed in these particular districts. And so we followed that Code of Virginia to make sure you're in compliance there. Are there any questions about any other particular uses when you went through the matrix, either for the primary districts or the O&H sub-districts? Were there any uses that you have a question about, why is it not allowed in this district, or anything like that we can discuss before I move on? Anything?
Not for me.
Not seeing any.
If we've left something out, we can add it later.
Absolutely. That's the beauty. You can, drop down the line and put it in alphabetically later.
Sure.
So the next article is the use performance standards. So again, that table is referring to this article and the sections in this article when the use has additional standards beyond what the district requires. Some of the uses with additional standards are accessory dwelling, agriculture, agritourism, home occupation, mobile vending, short-term rental. In terms of agriculture and agritourism, one thing you should know is that state code says if you have an agricultural district, which Abingdon does, then you have to allow these uses, and you have to kind of operate within some certain parameters in that agricultural district. But in terms of agritourism, you can still make sure, you're charged with protecting health, safety, and welfare of the community. And if the agritourism use might be encroaching on some of that protection, then you can have some standards related to that. And that's what we've introduced here in your ordinance. So we have supplied that, it has to be truly an active ag operation. It can't just be someone that has an acre of property and they're going to start saying, oh, this is agritourism, what I'm doing here. So they need to be actively in production on at least 5 acres. There's a limit to vehicle trips per day, which is 200 vehicle trips per day, just to make sure, it's not a big crowd all the time, just kind of thinking about neighbors there. And then limiting amplified music. Again, just sort of common sense, not having amplified music past 11 p.m. or before 7 a.m., being a good neighbor. Home occupation, there are 3 levels of home occupation, and they progress in intensity. So home occupation A is your less intense. It has no employees. It doesn't allow customers to come to the property or there to be signs. So basically, you have a home, you're just working from your home. No one really even needs to know about it, basically. Then B is you're a little bit larger. You're limited to 500 square feet or 30% of your dwelling square footage. It allows you to have 1 employee and 2 customers at a time at your property. And then level C is, I can't fit in those, but maybe it would still be okay for me to have this home occupation, and so they can come before you and request a special use permit. And you can decide on that case any other conditions or parameters if you decide to approve. And then short-term rental. I know this has been a hot topic and something that has been struggled with back and forth. And where the Planning Commission landed with this, you're removing, and I think you call it homestay now, is that right?
Yep.
So homestay would be removed. This would be short-term rental, and it's mostly just a registration requirement that would be annual so that you can keep up with who is actively having a short-term rental and who is not. It does not allow the use of recreational vehicles with the short-term rental. And you can revoke that permit. If there's lots of complaints coming in, 3 within 12 months can trigger revoking that permit. The procedure would be to go through the Planning Commission. There can be a public hearing to decide, is this a permanent thing, or are we doing this temporarily until they can adjust and improve, and then you could reassign and allow it again. Any questions about the use standards that I've just talked about, or any of the other use standards in the ordinance? All right. So the next article is your community design standards, and this is really all about, making sure Abingdon stays beautiful. It was a lovely drive in. I had to circle around the block to find parking, but lovely street trees, sidewalks, all of that stuff is looking great. And so these are things to continue to address that and make sure that you stay beautiful. So the first division in the community design standards is lighting. And this is just some very basic things just to make sure we're not having light trespass, whether that's up in the sky or on neighbor's property. So kind of, if you need lighting on your property, keeping it on your property. And also having some height restrictions in terms of the lighting. So industrial districts is a 30-foot, and then other districts is 20-foot. So again, and then full cutoff lighting and then compliance requirements as well. Any questions about the lighting standards? Hearing none.
I have a question just because it's come up.
Okay.
Somebody has asked me this. So when people put up twinkle lights or decorative lights that are not holiday decorations, but they're not a business, it's just on their home, does that fall under this guideline? Or does that fall under something else?
It would, I believe, we have, and that might actually fall under the signs.
Okay.
That there's allowance for holiday lighting, but not other lighting. I believe that's going to be in the signs.
Because the person was concerned about light pollution their neighbors had outdoor lights.
Could you give an example?
Well, if I do, I'm going to rat out the person who complained. I don't want to do that. But basically, the next door neighbors had like a curtain of flashing lights, and they were outside her bedroom window. And so she said, "Is this in code? Is there anything that can be done about this? Because I'm concerned she's going to leave it on all the time, keep me up all night." So, I don't know. I said, I don't know the answer to that question. So, anyway, I know that that's a weird question, but it is something that has actually come up during my tenure on council a couple of years ago. It's not recent, but still, I want to, if it ever comes up again, I'd like to know the answer.
So, and maybe this is a good time to introduce our new code compliance officer, whose name is Steve. He can wave. He's got quite a lot of experience from Florida. He does now live in Virginia and Johnson City, but so I had him come today so he can kind of hear what we're talking about. There was a request for exempting lighting for single-family and two-family residential developments, and I struck through that, and the Planning Commission agreed that yes, that would fall under what we would actually take a look at. So if it was causing light pollution, then we would definitely be considering it. So these wouldn't just be standards for businesses, it would be for residential as well.
Yes.
Just to clarify, that's only if somebody complains about it, right?
You got it.
Okay.
And I think the
You're
situation
safe,
that I'm
Steve.
referring to took care of itself, but at the time I didn't know the answer, and
Correct.
so, I went through our code and looked and couldn't find anything, and then it took care of itself and it ended. But, if it ever comes up again, I'd like to know where to
Yeah.
But
look.
under those standards, it'd have to be pretty significant light. I mean, it just that you have some white Christmas lights on your house isn't gonna be enough to
Right.
make the light pollution that's.
We're talking like Christmas vacation, right?
Yes.
That's it.
Yes.
That's it.
Okay, I'm just curious. I didn't mean to take us down a complete back road. I just wanted
Just as
to.
an aside, there have been people who have said that Abingdon forbids Christmas lights unless they are clear, and that is not true.
Good to know. Good to know.
Nor does the town actively police holiday or other decorations on people's houses, contrary to what other people have said.
Good to know.
Right, Steve?
Okay, sorry for the diversion.
No, that's all right. That's what we want to make sure we have an understanding about. So the next division is landscaping, walls, and fences. There are some increases here, and that's because that's what we heard was desired from the very beginning during the community engagement with staff, Planning Commission. It was, we do want some specifics, and we do want some clarity and a little more requirements in terms of trees and shrubs and looking nice. And so this division includes entrance corridor requirements. I'm not going to read all through those. I know that we're short on time today. The parking lot landscaping also has requirements, including planting islands, screening and enclosure of dumpsters and utility equipment, those things, keeping those hidden. Walls and fences also have standards about compatible materials, so you can't, start your fence with one thing and decide, nope, this section I'm gonna do it out of something different. So it all needs to be the same compatible materials. Finished to the outside and remain in good repair as well. Any questions about the landscaping or fences? Okay. The parking and loading is just edited based on best practices. We looked at those, the uses and how many spaces are required, and shifted those down where we thought they could go down, because many years ago, their parking was, lots and lots of parking, excess parking. So we've shifted that down where we can. We also are allowing joint use of space if things have different operating hours, as well as parking that's not necessarily on the property. It can be a distance away, those types of things, just to encourage efficient use of parking. Any questions about the parking standards? All right, so signs. This was previously drafted and adopted. Planning Commission staff have been working through some amendments to this. As always, when things get adopted, something comes in and shows you ways that you can change it and tweak it. And so they've been working through those items. Okay, so interestingly enough, we have probably half of our planning commission here as well today. So if you want to ask them about anything, make sure you utilize their service. So yes, with signs, we have a couple of questions, and that's just come over the last year of trying to implement our current sign regulations. So I put this in a question format for you all, so I thought we could kind of workshop it a little bit so I can get a clear understanding, and then Rebecca with the Berkeley Group can also get a clear understanding of where we're going. So the first one is, currently we allow temporary signs, but we don't require a permit. So if you had a temporary sign for an event, or if you had a temporary signage for a 2-for-1 special, or anything that you might have as a business, I could walk onto the property and say, has that been up for 30 days? And you could say, well, it just started yesterday. We have no permitting process for temporary signage, and so even though we have regulations, there's really no way to enforce them. So the first question is, should we require temporary sign permits? Staff suggesting yes. It just allows us, I know you have a look like that. I would say if you go down Cummings Street and you take a look around, you'll probably see some of our, fast food places that have just signage kind of all over them. There's no control, and so this would allow our code enforcement officer to essentially, hand out a sticker with the sign permit, and then go around and, actually monitor that signs were taken away, essentially. It would also limit how many per quarter. It would also limit extremely damaged signs and signs that just stay up forever. We just don't have the capacity right now legally to enforce it, so.
Some of them are faded so bad you can't even read them.
Correct. So
I worry just a little bit,
Okay.
to play the devil's advocate, that we're being so restrictive that people are just gonna complain all the time, For instance, not to throw anybody under the bus, but did anybody else notice the temporary sign across from Food Country that says grave plots, buy one, get one free?
Yeah. Oh, wow.
They're really, I ran by the other day and saw that, and I thought, that's interesting.
Cue the number.
But, yeah, right. And so, yeah, I mean, what do you think, council?
Would there be a
I think
I'm
it
sorry.
should be permitted. I think
A
it
permit.
should- yeah.
Permitted?
Yes.
Okay.
Because sometimes people put up signs and they're just there forever.
But-
And
It's
they're
true.
irrelevant.
It's
And then
true.
they just,
Correct.
then it's just trash, It's, aesthetically unappealing.
But are we gonna have to multiply Steve times 3?
I think once, Initially, maybe, but I think once people get used to the fact that they have to
there
get
is
a
code
permit,
enforcement.
and that, just like an example in Historic Preservation Review Board where we did a temporary sign, but we made them to give us an end date.
Correct.
So that we know exactly when that sign needs to come down, and if it doesn't, then, but, yeah, I think it needs to be, get permits.
Would there be a cost with the permit?
There doesn't have to be.
Okay.
It really doesn't.
Maybe other
You all can make that
municipalities.
determination. Sorry.
Yeah, what's the normal? I mean, is there usually a
For
charge?
permanent signs, we have a square footage cost, and
But
it's
for
not.
temporary, I mean.
For temporary, no. We don't right now.
I don't want to nickel and dime our businesses today.
Yeah, I mean, that's my thing. I hesitate to be so restrictive that all we do is hear complaints from,
Okay.
business owners. I'm not saying I'm against permitting, I just don't
Okay.
know that we should have a cost, or,
Okay.
Yeah.
What do y'all think, Dwayne?
I agree, Adam.
I'm in compliance with that, because Well,
Is
those
there a
things-
standard?
There are.
Industry standard as far as. Is there a fee or no fee, or how long?
It can go both ways. The standard pretty much is, we have in here, we're really not changing the standards for it. It's just right now, no permit is required. So the 30 days, I think, is what it is currently. And that just allows, it allows a business owner to have their event or have their special or come in and, have additional signage that's temporary. But it allows us to then take it away and not allow it to just go on indefinitely.
Mr. Mayor, if you take a look right across from where you go to work, there's the McDonald's has been hiring since March.
Oh, I know, and employees
Yeah.
eat free at Hardee's. I've seen that one for.
Yeah, so, I mean, and the banner's like 15, 20
Yeah,
feet wide,
yeah.
and I mean, it's probably sun faded by now, but I
Sure,
think 30 days is,
Yeah, 30 days seems reasonable to me. Like I said, I just hate to run Steve to death and have him clobbered by every business owner in town. But if that's the consensus, I'm okay with it. I'm good with it.
Okay.
Does that give you direction?
Definitely.
All right.
So we'll permit it, we'll kind of talk internally about how long and all of that. So the next one that we get a lot is, we currently don't allow signage in our right-of-ways. So, but we've gotten quite a few complaints. So in the past, and you can probably pull it up on Google Maps, you can see that signs were just kind of all in all the right-of-ways. People put signs wherever they want. If there's like small snipe signs that say 2 for 1 or we buy houses, our code enforcement officer goes and just removes those from the right-of-way. If they're a larger sign, let's say it was a special event sign, we will contact the owner. If it's like pumpkin patch, in this intersection, we'll contact the owner and say signs aren't allowed in our right-of-way. So, one of the questions is just, we've had a lot of pushback from that. And I just kind of want to make sure that we're all still on board with that. We're not putting signage for anything. Special events are the one that's particularly onerous. But staff thinks that if you allow it for special events, then you're going to need to allow it for any off-premise business that wants to advertise there. So I just want to make sure that Steve has your support when he calls and people complain that we're taking down the signs that they've always put up there every year. So
I agree they shouldn't use the right of way.
What do you think, council? I've gotten a few calls about that myself.
So basically, they'd be using taxpayers' property to advertise.
Correct.
Which is not,
Correct.
shouldn't be allowed, in my opinion.
Correct. And if they call and ask, we say no, but then we do spend time taking them out, and then we've had several people who are quite upset, but, it's just, where do you start and stop that?
But
Because
now,
the
if a
moment.
property owner gives you permission, that's still okay, correct?
So now that's the next question,
Okay.
number 3. So that's the next question. So are you okay with property owners, and I mean, right now, it might feel like, it's not a whole lot of them doing it, but are you okay with property owners putting up signs, and I'm not talking about residential signage for, a little summer banner or their street number or a bumblebee in the garden. Are you okay with the residential properties having signage for special events and for businesses, and with a reminder and a caveat and Cam will back me up here, is that we can't control content. So the moment you essentially allow, like, you can't really say residential properties can have special event signage on them. It's kind of an all or nothing mentality.
Can you give us an example of, it's not allowed now, right?
It is not, but it's kind of like what our mayor just said. You know, he said, like, if somebody comes in and says, oh, I can't have it stuck in the ground right in front of the town, welcome to the town of Abingdon sign. Well, I'm gonna move it over here. I'm gonna ask so-and-so, and I'm gonna put it
Yeah.
just over the edge.
Well, there's one place in particular, Miami knows exactly where I'm talking about, that there's always event signage, and it's a personal property's yard, and it's right beside an easement. Yeah, so they jump right across into this person's yard and ask them, and they're okay with it, you know. But
So are you talking about, you know, that, like, say somebody's having a craft fair and they put signs up?
Let's say mistletoe market in somebody's yard.
Right.
That wouldn't be allowed. They'd have to have
Okay.
a permit.
I don't really have a problem with that as long as it's,
I think we're saying.
A short
not even
duration.
permit. We
no, I
wouldn't
think we're
permit
saying
something
all or
on private
none,
property,
like
would
can
we?
there, cannot. Does that include political signage, like in
I was
election
gonna say the exact
cycles?
same thing, Mayor.
So you're fine with your political sign.
All right.
Political
Not in the-
signage is protected.
Not in the right of way, that's actually state law. You
In the right of way, you're still not supposed to. I have some language which I need to talk to Cam about, but whether or not we have the allowance, or allow them in the right of way in general, but we won't take down your signs, don't worry. But yeah, I mean, it's just, because it probably sounds fine if Mistletoe Market wants it and they put it in a few parcels, but then what if Burger King says, hey, okay, we're allowed to do signs in residential properties, and then now suddenly everybody is advertising.
Wouldn't off-site
it-
signs capture that though?
It does, it does. So right now, it wouldn't be allowed. We just have been basically overlooking it, because we do have some people pretty stressed out.
So a permutation of that would be, you're not allowed to put off-site signage for a business. So if a business is down a side road, then they just ask somebody's permission and say, I'm gonna put it in somebody's yard, and then that's the sign for whatever down the street. And that's an off-premise sign, so it's not allowed for that reason anyway.
Yeah.
But
I kind of lean towards that we do not allow off-premise signage. That's just my
Okay.
opinion. You guys know that I'm a little more stricter than.
I just think we're gonna get so many phone calls and complaints that we're gonna hate life
I mean,
But-
If we do allow it.
if we don't allow.
because it's gonna be the same people who, and I'm not being critical of these people, I understand where they're coming from. It's gonna be the same people who are upset because they no longer can advertise on the banner. People, I mean, I've been on multiple committees and involved with multiple organizations who want to advertise their event. There's a particular yard in town that they always put the sign in. And so,
All of a sudden, if we cut that off.
if we cut,
they're
people are
gonna
gonna
lose their
say, there's
minds,
just
yeah.
one more way that I'm not allowed to advertise my event.
Yeah.
And I don't really wanna do that to people.
Yeah. I just think we gotta be careful, like, you sort of get into the weeds with.
Should they be permitted?
Yeah, it just gets so restrictive that we're almost telling property owners, oh, you can't do that.
Yeah.
And at some point in time, you sort of have to, let people do what they want with their properties to a certain degree.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I could go on for this one for quite a few minutes because I got a few just really horrible phone calls. And
The
Well, you know, and
wording,
there-
the wording just isn't correct on it.
Right, and there
It's
are some
got good
organi-
purpose, but it, I
Yeah.
guess you could say.
And there are some organizations like William King and
Sure.
they're noming, then I guess that would prevent them from fundraising in that way. So I think that there are little tendrils that we have to very seriously consider.
yeah.
Okay, so it does sound like there's support for off-premise signage on residential parcels,
Yeah,
is
if
really
it's
what I'm
somebody's
hearing.
private property, I think I'm for it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, one thing I want to be known for is being consistent.
Mhm.
Don't pick and choose. You
Right.
can do it, but you can't do it.
Right.
Correct, and that's why I'm asking the question, because basically, if we're gonna allow it, if we're gonna say that you can have off-premise signage in a residential parcel, then we just have to be prepared for that.
Is there a sign limitation on off-premises?
We definitely can put a sign limitation, like we can have square footage, and we could say, we do have some right now. Basically, currently, there's a lot of different types of off-premise signage. You could have or a residential signage. You could have a banner, you can have a freestanding, I mean, there's a lot of things going on there. I think that we could create sort of a more uniform square footage, just, 32 square feet, and they can decide if they want 4 small 1 square foot signs or if they want more. So, if you all in favor of it, that was kind of the question that I needed to get, so.
And could there be a time limit or a?
Well, and that goes back to the permitting idea.
Yeah.
If we want to, it could be permitted just like a temporary sign would for a business.
Because I know that has come up in the past, and this was before you were here. So a little bit of historic knowledge. When we were working on this, before I was on council, before any of us were on council, I believe, with the Save Mary's Meadows signs. And they went around and took some of them down that had been up for more than 30 days.
Okay.
Because they said that was what the code said. And people got very angry that their signs, that they were making a political statement, were removed from their property.
Should not have
So-
been removed from their property. I will say that. Cam will probably say that as well.
That
We
goes
shouldn't have
back
gone
to-
on to a private,
Yeah,
a private,
right.
private parcel. But this would allow it, if you do want to allow it on residential parcels, then this would make it even clearer by permitting it.
So people can make political statements.
They can already do that. So you can say, you can have, for example, like an anti-abortion sign in your front yard or a religious sign. Those are already protected. This is really very specific to off-premise signage. So you can all,
For other business.
correct, and events. So,
I'm in
okay.
favor of leaving them alone.
Okay.
Yeah, me too.
Right now, in the Olden Historic District, that signage is just a separate section. It doesn't have a code or box or anything related to it. And so basically, there isn't a single sign that's allowed up in the Olden Historic District without HPRB approval. That becomes challenging when, like, there's a new business coming in and they want to basically have a temporary sign or a banner that other districts would allow. Here, they'd have to go through an actual certificate of appropriateness. And so I'm just asking, kind of asking you, I'll ask the HPRB as well, but it is quite restrictive and does make, again, a challenging situation for code compliance to have to go around and say, oh, Peddling Jacks, you're moving from that building over here where you need to take down your temporary sign because it hasn't gone through HPRB for approval. So I don't know what the thoughts are.
I think I personally would defer to HPRB on that one.
Okay.
I'm okay with whatever their feelings are.
Me too.
They're kind of the experts in the Olden
Okay.
Historic, so.
Yeah.
Okay, I will ask them, and then we'll use that for the planning commission. And then the final item really is this whole idea of town-sponsored events. And I know that the banner came down quite a while ago, and we still have light poles with some signage capabilities on there. And so I'm just wanting to know if there's any movement while we've got the code open for any type of town-sponsored events to be allowed, light pole signage, other locations for signage, or if you all are still saying, let's make sure we don't have events.
I personally think if we're gonna give money to an event, then we ought to allow them to put signs up.
Yeah.
That's just my 2 cents, but it's kind of hard for me I feel like it's almost contradictory to give $3,000 to a specific event and then be like, oh, no, you can't put your sign up.
On town right away.
Yeah. I just think,
I think we're not being consistent.
that's,
When we had the discussion, and
catch-22.
I've discussed it with the town manager, and we discussed it on our Veterans Advisory Committee board, for example, one of the groups that is very upset that we no longer have the banner poles is the Veterans Memorial Park Foundation. And so what we kind of thought of as a compromise is, sure, if you're going to have a Veterans Day program in Veterans Memorial Park, then you could put a banner in Veterans Memorial Park, advertising your Veterans Day event that will be taking place in that space. And I think we agreed that that would be something that, could be considered if it were appropriate. So, that's another thing. That's a town-sponsored event on town property, so they should be, if we're not going to do the banners, then we might need to think about other ways that people can advertise within reason, so we don't have the same problems we had that caused us to remove the banner. Potential problems. We never actually
then-
had problems, but we were concerned about potential legal issues.
But didn't we just have the Presbyterian Church, Jeff Johnson's here now,
that we sort of
Correct.
said. So I sort of agree with Mike. I mean, are we being consistent if we just?
No,
say-
we allowed them to have a sign though, over on the side.
This is,
Right.
Not on the poles, though.
Yeah,
this
not on
is-
the poles.
This
Yeah.
is on town right of ways that she's talking about.
Correct.
Okay.
So again, and it may be a larger discussion or more of a workshop. I know you guys have something else to go to, but, that's just, right now, we don't have a place for town-sponsored events. If we say there is a town-sponsored event, I think it also opens it up. It's real difficult for us to say, well then, Highlands Festival, which kind of occurs all over town, yeah, you can have as many signs as you want throughout town, and then the next person says, well, I have a pumpkin patch. I didn't ask the town for money, why can't I put my sign up? So,
I'm gonna have to think about that.
yeah, I think if you all want to think about that one, I got direction on the rest, and so we'll let Rebecca come up and continue.
Well, I think the purpose of this is so that we can be consistent going forward. Am I
Right.
correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
100%. I agree. I think we need to be as consistent as possible, so, yeah.
And we've had various
Agreed.
things
Agreed.
happen, and so it will be good to have a guideline to go by.
Sure.
Yes. All right.
We gotta think about this.
Yeah. All right, Rebecca, you've got 30 seconds. Joking, I'm
Bless her
teasing. I'm teasing.
I thought your next thing was at 4:30. All right, let's see, it's not much left. The next article is nonconformities. I also sent the guide that you see on the screen that talks about nonconformities. There's a lot of state legislation based on this, what can be allowed, what cannot be allowed. Most people are familiar with this being called grandfathered. Aren't I grandfathered? And the answer is yes. If you're legal under the ordinance today and we change a rule and adopt it, then yes, you can continue with your lot, use, or structure. So this article says that lots you can build if it meets setback requirements, you can adjust or combine a lot to become conforming, and you can rezone to a different district. In terms of uses, you can change to a conforming use, you can extend throughout a building, you can change to more restrictive use. You do lose your status if you're no longer doing the use for 2 years or more. And then structures, you can alter or extend if not increasing nonconformity, meaning if you are not meeting the current front setback and you want to add on to your home, you can add on to the rear or to the side as long as you're not in that front setback area. You can do full internal remodel, important for Abingdon with all of its historic buildings. And then you can rebuild when damaged by natural disaster, and then also can replace mobile homes, which is a state code item. The next article, I'm assuming there's no questions about nonconformities. The next article is subdivisions. The bulk of the things here that changed was the organization. So we just organized it a little differently, trying to make it a little more user-friendly. We've put in some state code items, references to state code, as well as corrected some things. One of those corrections was there was a requirement for preliminary plats, and state code says you can't require preliminary plats unless it's a subdivision of more than 50 lots. So we followed the state code requirement there. One thing of clarity is that this is a preliminary plat for a subdivision. You can still require a site plan. So lots of communities get concerned and go, we can't ask for a site plan. You can ask for a site plan. In terms of the process, we are allowing administrative approval of 2 lots. So currently, any type of division has to come before you for approval. And now we are saying if a person has a lot and they just want to divide that once, they're going to, keep a portion and sell a portion or what have you, then that can be administratively approved. And then town council approval for streets and sidewalks. This was previously, I think, planning commission, but because you are approving other items, we wanted to make this consistent so that the sidewalks and streets were also in the same vein with other portions. Any questions on subdivisions?
All right. Then the last article of the ordinance is definitions. We've just made sure we are including all the new terms, so we've included the subdivision ordinance into this document. We've brought in the definitions here as well, Code of Virginia terms. We've added some clarity for district regulation terms, making sure all of those are defined and clearly defined. And then we have defined every use that is supplied in the ordinance. So that takes us through our work sessions. And do you all have any other edits, anything else that you would like to discuss before this gets moved to Planning Commission for public hearing?
Anything specific? I don't.
All right, great. So I'll be working with Mayanna. We'll be incorporating final edits that we've discussed over these past couple of work sessions and that she's been talking with Planning Commission about. And then we're going to potentially have the public hearing in November with Planning Commission and then moving to you all in December.
These little hiccups that are with the yard signs and things, that will be addressed prior to,
Yes.
and that will be presented back to us. Does that go back to the planning commission? I mean, does that go back to the?
Planning Commission uses again.
Okay.
On you, Kenny.
No pressure, Kenny, none at all.
Well, I'm here if there are any questions at all that I can answer on behalf of the planning commission, I'd be happy to.
Well, thank you for doing all that work. I think.
Great.
Jeff, are you still on it, aren't you? So you've been, thank you, Jeff, for working on it also.
Well, I mean, no, but Kenny has done a very admirable job. Staff, you can't say enough about, the leadership and everything that they've done. So, very fortunate.
One thing I would say too is, just so you know, the makeup of the planning commission, you have an architect, an engineer, an attorney, 2 bankers, and a person who owns a small business. So there have been a lot of different types of eyes looking at what you're ultimately going to see.
Thank you. Thank you.
We
Thank
took
you.
longer than
Thank
what
you.
you all did.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
That's
You
it.
all have digested it for us.
That's it.
Makes our
That's
job
it.
easier, so thank you.
All right. That brings us to miscellaneous business communications from the town manager. Mr. Crocker, anything
No.
today?
I'm good to go, thank you.
Excellent. And I know we're kind of in a rush, but council, do we have any reports we'd like to make? None today? All right. We don't have a closed session today, so we are adjourned. Thank you all.
Peek at me.